It was a night so cold, the stars themselves seemed to shiver, hidden behind a curtain of swirling snow. Along an empty road, illuminated only by dim moonlight, lay a mother German shepherd named Bella, curled protectively around her tiny, trembling puppies. Can you imagine the desperation she must have felt, abandoned to the mercy of an endless winter night? As you listen, let us know where you're joining from, perhaps someplace warmer, or somewhere equally touched by the chill of this heartfelt tale. The snow fell relentlessly, thick and heavy, blanketing the road outside Cedar Grove in a ghostly white. Each gust of wind seemed harsher than the last, carrying sharp flecks of ice that stung like tiny needles. Bella, a gentle German shepherd mother just 3 years old, lay curled on the frozen ground, her black and tan fur crusted with ice, her deep amber eyes wide with exhaustion and worry. Beneath her, 4 delicate puppies whimpered softly, their tiny bodies trembling against the unforgiving cold. They had been left there, alone, as if they were worthless. Farther down the same desolate road, the dim headlights of an old pickup truck pierced weakly through the swirling storm. Inside the vehicle, Jake Turner, a tall, rugged man in his early 30s, gripped the steering wheel tightly, staring blankly through the windshield. His dark brown hair was disheveled, his beard rough and unkempt, and shadows beneath his deep-set blue eyes told a story of sleepless nights and restless dreams. It had been 6 months since he'd returned home from overseas, yet the echoes of battle still haunted him. Every sound, every silence, carried memories he desperately wished to forget. Jake squinted as the headlights caught a faint shadow ahead. His heartbeat quickened, fingers tightening instinctively on the wheel. At first, it seemed only a vague shape, easily mistaken for snowdrifts piled high by the roadside. But something about it drew Jake's attention, a familiar sense of vulnerability, of life hanging by the most fragile thread. His foot hesitated above the brake pedal. He told himself it was probably nothing, perhaps debris blown from someone's yard. But an uneasy feeling nagged at him, pulling memories from deep within. Memories of brothers in arms who depended on him, faces he'd vowed never to forget. His truck slowed almost of its own accord, rolling closer until the faint outline sharpened into focus. There, in the bitter snow, lay Bella, her body curled protectively around her pups. Her gaze locked onto Jake's approaching vehicle, eyes glinting weakly in the headlights. She made no sound, offered no growl or bark, just silent pleading, as if she understood the fragile hope now riding toward her. Jake exhaled sharply, his breath misting heavily in the cold cab. A voice inside whispered that he should drive on, that his own pain was burden enough. He wasn't ready for responsibility, especially now. But another voice, stronger, calmer, spoke clearly of duty, compassion, and the brotherhood he'd cherished. It reminded him that life was sacred, no matter how small or helpless. Before he knew it, Jake had already parked beside the road. He stepped outside into the biting wind, pulling his thick coat tighter around his broad shoulders. Each step closer felt heavier, the crunch of snow beneath his boots echoing painfully in his ears. Bella's eyes never left him as he approached. They were filled with caution, exhaustion, and a flicker of hesitant hope. "It's okay, girl," Jake whispered softly, crouching slowly beside her. "I'm here now. I won't hurt you." He reached out a calloused hand carefully. Bella flinched slightly, her body stiffening, but something in Jake's gentle demeanor reassured her. Gradually, she allowed his touch, his fingers brushing tenderly across her icy fur. The puppies stirred restlessly, tiny cries of distress breaking his heart anew. "You're a brave mother," he murmured softly, his throat tightening. "You've kept them alive against all odds." Without hesitation, Jake lifted his jacket from his shoulders and spread it on the snow beside Bella. Carefully, he began placing each puppy onto the warmth of his coat. Bella watched warily but didn't move, her strength seemingly drained by the long hours spent sheltering her precious family. Finally, Jake stood, the puppies secured in the warmth of his coat, bundled gently in his strong arms. He looked down at Bella, seeing clearly now the depth of her trust in this moment. "Come on, girl," he said gently, patting his thigh reassuringly. "It's your turn now. I promise you all, it's going to be okay." With great effort, Bella staggered to her feet. Her body trembled, weakened by cold and hunger, yet determination shone through in every careful step she took beside Jake toward the warmth and safety of his truck. It wasn't much, just an old pickup battered by time, but tonight it would become their shelter and their chance for survival. Jake placed the puppies gently on the passenger seat, covering them with a thick wool blanket he always kept handy. Bella climbed carefully after, curling protectively around her pups once again. Jake climbed behind the wheel, heart pounding with a sense of purpose he'd long thought lost. As the truck moved slowly through the relentless storm toward Cedar Grove, Jake knew their lives had changed forever. Tonight, he'd saved Bella and her family, but deep inside, he sensed that perhaps they'd saved him too. The old truck finally pulled up outside a modest wooden cabin, nestled quietly at the edge of Cedar Grove. Snow still drifted softly, blanketing the world in quietness, but inside Jake Turner's vehicle, warmth and a sense of newfound purpose filled the air. Bella, still cautious but now calmer, raised her weary head to gaze out the window, sensing that safety might finally be within reach. Jake stepped out quickly, his boots crunching through fresh snow as he opened the passenger door and gently carried Bella's puppies inside first, wrapped snugly in blankets. Bella watched carefully from the seat, her amber eyes alert yet beginning to show flickers of trust. Jake's cabin was small but cozy, dimly lit by an old lamp, with walls bearing photos of people he had loved and lost. Once a home filled with laughter, it now stood mostly silent, an echo of happier days. Tonight, though, the silence would break, making space for life again. He arranged a soft bed near the warmth of the fireplace, placing each puppy tenderly onto the thick fleece blankets. Each puppy whimpered softly, their tiny paws stretching weakly before settling into sleep. Bella cautiously approached her pups, sniffing each one carefully, then curled protectively around them, never taking her wary eyes off Jake. Jake moved quietly, respecting Bella's caution, aware of how much she'd endured. He brought bowls of fresh water and food, setting them down carefully near the bed. Bella sniffed tentatively at the food, hunger overcoming her initial hesitation. Watching her eat, Jake felt a quiet relief spread through him, an emotion he'd almost forgotten existed. Something about seeing her finally safe and eating warmed him, sparking memories of simple joys he'd shared with his own family before tragedy took everything away. Later that night, Jake sat across from Bella and the puppies, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that once belonged to his father. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Bella, though resting now, lifted her head occasionally, her ears swiveling toward every small sound, ensuring her pups were safe. Jake smiled faintly at this vigilance, recognizing a familiar protectiveness. He knew that instinct well. He remembered how fiercely he'd tried to protect his fellow soldiers, friends who were like brothers, and how deeply he'd suffered when he couldn't. He spoke quietly, his voice gentle and reflective. "You're a good mom, Bella," he said softly, barely above a whisper. Bella's ears perked up, listening to the calmness in his tone. "I had a good family too once. We laughed a lot, you know. My daughter Emma loved dogs, always begged me to get one, but it never seemed like the right time. Now," his voice caught briefly, emotion tightening his throat. "Now, I wish I'd listened." Bella watched Jake intently, perhaps sensing the sadness in his tone. She slowly moved closer, still wary but drawn by something in his voice, a softness beneath the pain. Hesitantly, she placed her head lightly against Jake's knee. This simple act of trust surprised him, and his heart swelled gently. Carefully, Jake rested his hand on her fur, feeling its warmth and softness beneath his palm. For the first time in months, the weight pressing upon his chest eased slightly, replaced by a quiet sense of companionship and comfort. Days passed gently, each one deepening the bond between Bella, her puppies, and Jake. Each feeding, each quiet night spent watching Bella nurture her young, filled Jake's empty hours with meaning. Bella, in turn, grew calmer, her caution softening into trust, accepting Jake's presence as part of her new reality. Soon, she greeted Jake's return from errands with wagging tail and brightened eyes, her gentle acceptance slowly melting away the lingering ice around his heart. One particularly cold afternoon, Jake sat on the floor beside Bella and her puppies, watching them sleep peacefully. Memories surfaced more easily now, less painful, more comforting. His wife Sarah's laugh, Emma's mischievous grin. Tears welled softly, not just from grief, but gratitude. Bella raised her head, quietly noticing the emotion spilling from him, and with gentle reassurance, pressed softly against his side, reminding him that he was not alone. Jake smiled softly, realizing Bella's quiet strength had awakened something in him. He was beginning to heal, thanks to this brave mother dog and her little family. In rescuing them, he'd inadvertently begun to rescue himself. Days melted into weeks, and Bella's strength gradually returned under Jake's devoted care, her pups growing playful and spirited. Yet, despite these peaceful moments, something nagged at Jake's heart, a lingering doubt that couldn't be shaken. It was a cloudy afternoon when he decided to take Bella to the local veterinary clinic in Cedar Grove, a cozy brick building run by Dr. Laura Bennett. Laura, a kind-hearted woman in her late 30s with short chestnut hair, warm hazel eyes, and a reassuring voice, had spent her life caring for animals in need. Known throughout the town for her gentle yet determined nature, Laura had built her clinic as a haven for creatures seeking refuge from cruelty. As Jake led Bella into the clinic, her ears flicked nervously, but Laura greeted them with a soft smile, instantly calming the dog's anxiety. During the careful examination, Laura's gentle hands paused as she brushed aside Bella's thick fur, revealing a faded tattoo-like marking beneath her collar. A small, worn symbol, barely discernible against Bella's skin, told a story darker than either Laura or Jake had anticipated. Laura's brows furrowed, concern deepening in her eyes. "Jake," she murmured quietly, tracing the symbol gently. "This mark, I've seen it before. It belongs to a notorious breeding farm outside Cedar Grove, a place that was shut down once, but rumors persist. It's reopened quietly. Dogs there were terribly mistreated." Jake's stomach twisted into a painful knot at her words. He glanced down at Bella, her trusting eyes gazing up at him, innocent and yet filled with shadows from a past she couldn't express. Anger stirred quietly in Jake's chest, mixing with sorrow and a heavy sense of responsibility. He thought of the days he'd spent overseas, how helpless he'd felt witnessing suffering he couldn't stop. He couldn't erase those haunting memories, but now, perhaps he had a chance to set something right, to protect others who still suffered in silence. Laura continued gently, her voice strained with emotion. "Jake, Bella isn't alone. Recently, we've found many dogs abandoned around Cedar Grove, all showing signs of severe neglect, fear, and exhaustion. Most bear similar markings, indicating they all came from that same facility." Laura paused, her eyes filling briefly with sadness before her resolve firmed again. "We need to put an end to this, once and for all." The room was silent for a moment, only the soft breathing of Bella filling the quiet. Jake finally nodded slowly, determination hardening the lines around his eyes. "Tell me where this place is," he said softly, but with unmistakable resolve. Laura hesitated briefly, sensing the weight Jake carried, aware that this journey could reopen old wounds. Yet she also recognized the need in his voice, the hope of redemption it carried. Quietly, she gave him the location, her eyes filled with understanding and silent support. That night, back at the cabin, Jake sat by the fireplace, the flames flickering softly, casting moving shadows on Bella and her sleeping pups. He gently stroked Bella's fur, contemplating the steps he would soon take. Each caress deepened his resolve, reminding him vividly of the comrades he'd once lost, men he'd been unable to save. Bella lifted her head gently, sensing his tension, nudging softly against his hand as if trying to offer comfort. Jake smiled faintly at her gesture, feeling a renewed sense of purpose igniting within him. He whispered softly, more to himself than to Bella, "You're safe now, but your friends aren't. I won't let others suffer as you did." Not again. Bella's amber eyes seemed to glisten softly, reflecting the dancing firelight, as if she understood the silent promise he made. In the stillness that followed, Jake felt the familiar sting of his past wounds, memories of missions gone wrong, lives he desperately tried and failed to save. But this time felt different. This time, the path ahead was clearer, lit by Bella's quiet strength and trust. He would confront the shadows he'd long avoided, face those who preyed upon innocent lives, and perhaps, in doing so, begin healing the deeper wounds that lay hidden within his own heart. As dawn broke gently over Cedar Grove, Jake stood ready, determined to face whatever awaited him. He knew the journey ahead would be painful, bringing back memories he'd struggled to bury. But this was no longer just his battle. It was for Bella, for her pups, and for every silent victim awaiting rescue. Over the following days, Jake and Laura quietly gathered evidence, uncovering the grim reality hidden at the outskirts of Cedar Grove. They learned the cruel truth, that dogs who failed to meet the brutal standards of the illegal breeding facility were callously discarded, abandoned like unwanted garbage. This revelation burned deep inside Jake's chest, reigniting old wounds of helplessness and guilt. He remembered the many times he'd watched comrades struggle, feeling powerless as their pain echoed endlessly through sleepless nights. But now, this sense of purpose strengthened his resolve, reminding him he wasn't powerless anymore. He could still protect the innocent, still fight battles worth fighting. Meanwhile, in the safety of Jake's cozy cabin, Bella and her pups blossomed. Each puppy began developing unique personalities, filled with curiosity and boundless energy. Yet, among them, little Toby stood apart, noticeably smaller and frailer than his siblings, yet fiercely determined in spirit. Toby, a German Shepherd puppy barely 5 weeks old, had soft, golden-brown fur and bright, soulful eyes that always seemed to study Jake carefully. Despite his fragility, Toby refused to let his weakness define him. He stumbled often but always rose, tail wagging bravely, unwilling to quit. Watching Toby stirred something powerful in Jake, mirroring his own struggle, broken but not beaten, vulnerable yet strong. Late one evening, while Jake was gently feeding Toby by the warm fireplace, there was a knock at the cabin door, sharp and sudden. Instantly, Bella rose, her fur bristling protectively, amber eyes alert. Jake cautiously stood, placing Toby carefully back with his siblings, then approached the door slowly. When he opened it, a man stood silhouetted against the dim porch light. The stranger was tall, dressed in a dark coat, with neatly combed hair, and a cold, calculating expression that chilled Jake to his bones. His voice was low and steady, carefully controlled as if masking something sinister. "Mr. Turner," he began, calmly yet firmly, "you've been asking questions you shouldn't. Some matters are better left alone." Jake's jaw tightened, a defensive anger rising within him. He stepped forward, blocking any view inside, instinctively shielding Bella and the pups from this sudden threat. "Who are you?" Jake asked sharply, refusing to be intimidated by the stranger's menacing presence. The man smiled thinly, eyes cold, betraying no emotion. "Someone who prefers quiet neighbors," he replied softly, handing Jake a plain business card with just a phone number printed neatly. "Think carefully," the stranger warned, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your quiet life could easily become complicated." As the man disappeared into the darkness, Jake felt the familiar pulse of anxiety tightening in his chest, memories of past dangers flooding back. Closing the door securely, he returned inside, breathing deeply to calm himself. Bella immediately approached, gently nudging Jake's hand with her muzzle, sensing his tension. Her comforting presence helped steady him, reminding him again why he'd chosen this path. Sitting back near the fireplace, Jake's eyes rested upon Toby, the tiny puppy now fast asleep, curled tightly among his siblings, breathing softly and peacefully. He picked Toby up gently, feeling the small, fragile heartbeat against his palm. Toby stirred slightly but didn't awaken, trusting Jake completely, safe in his hands. Jake felt deeply moved, realizing how strongly he identified with this little creature who battled so bravely against the odds. He whispered softly to the sleeping puppy, his voice tender yet resolute. "You remind me of myself, Toby. Life hasn't always been kind, has it? But we'll face whatever comes, together." Bella lay quietly at Jake's feet, watching carefully with wise, patient eyes. as if understanding every word Jake spoke. That night, Jake resolved firmly in his heart. No threats could make him abandon those who relied on him. He knew silence would mean betrayal, a surrender to injustice. He refused to allow fear or intimidation to rule his actions. Instead, he drew courage from Toby's fragile bravery and Bella's unwavering trust, determined to protect them no matter the cost. As the night deepened, Jake felt renewed strength filling him, born from compassion and a sense of duty he could no longer deny. The threats wouldn't silence him. The fear wouldn't hold him captive anymore. The truth had to be spoken, justice pursued, not just for Bella, Toby, and their family, but for every innocent life suffering unseen. Jake now understood fully. The past had wounded him deeply, but this fight would begin his healing. No longer running from darkness, he would face it head-on, armed with newfound courage and purpose. The sun rose gently over Cedar Grove, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, promising warmth after a long winter. But this morning, the warmth wasn't just from the sunlight. It radiated from the hearts of those gathered in the town square, united by a common purpose. Jake stood quietly at the front, his heart pounding softly, feeling both anxiety and hope mingle within him. Beside him stood Dr. Laura Bennett, whose calm strength steadied his nerves, and Sheriff Paul Anderson, a steady man in his late 50s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, respected throughout Cedar Grove for his integrity and dedication. In the days following the stranger's threat, Jake had bravely shared what he'd learned with Sheriff Anderson. Inspired by Jake's courage and Laura's quiet persistence, Cedar Grove rallied together, determined to put an end to the cruelty hidden in their community. This morning was the culmination of their efforts. As the townspeople assembled, ready to support the authorities, Jake felt a powerful sense of community he'd thought he'd lost forever. Hours later, at the outskirts of town, the operation unfolded swiftly and decisively. Authorities moved in, Sheriff Anderson leading with firm authority. The illegal breeding facility, hidden behind high fences and thick woods, was finally exposed. The heart-wrenching sight of countless dogs, neglected and mistreated, brought tears to many eyes, but determination outweighed grief. One by one, the terrified animals were gently rescued and placed into the caring arms of waiting volunteers. Their frail bodies finally offered kindness and compassion. Throughout the day, Jake tirelessly helped move each rescued dog to safety, his strength unwavering even as the scenes before him pierced deeply into his heart. Bella stayed close by his side, calm and reassuring, almost as if she understood the magnitude of this moment. Watching Bella's gentle interactions with the rescued dogs warmed Jake's heart profoundly. He saw in her eyes a reflection of his own journey, pain replaced gradually by hope, distrust transformed into warmth. When evening came, the townspeople gathered once more, this time in joyful relief. The rescued dogs, now safe, lay resting comfortably in makeshift shelters around Cedar Grove, cared for by loving hands. Among the townsfolk were familiar faces like Mary Thompson, an elderly volunteer whose gentle care comforted frightened puppies, and young Ben Carter, whose energetic enthusiasm brought smiles and laughter, a reminder of innocence and optimism. Each face reflected gratitude, unity, and a shared victory. As Jake returned home that night, exhausted yet fulfilled, Bella trotted happily beside him. Her puppies, now healthy and playful, greeted them joyfully, little Toby bravely pushing forward, his tiny tail wagging fiercely. Jake knelt, smiling warmly, allowing the puppies to climb into his lap, their playful antics bringing laughter into his quiet home, filling spaces that had been empty too long. Over the following weeks, Bella and her family became symbols of hope and renewal for the people of Cedar Grove. Townspeople visited Jake's once solitary cabin regularly, bringing warmth, friendship, and shared laughter. The cabin, previously shadowed by loneliness, gradually transformed into a haven of warmth and joy, a place where kindness and healing flourished freely. Jake found himself smiling more, speaking openly with neighbors, embracing a newfound community he'd never thought he'd know again. Bella herself seemed to understand the importance of her role, greeting each visitor gently, her amber eyes warm and reassuring. The puppies thrived, especially brave little Toby, whose strength and resilience inspired everyone who met him. For Jake, each day with Bella and her pups reminded him clearly of life's deeper meaning, compassion, courage, and the strength found in family, however that family came to be. One quiet evening, as twilight painted soft shadows across Cedar Grove, Jake sat peacefully on his porch, Bella resting contentedly at his feet, the puppies dozing gently beside her. He felt deeply grateful for everything they'd brought into his life. Through darkness, they'd found light together. Through pain, they'd discovered healing. Jake whispered softly to Bella, his voice filled with gentle sincerity. "You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. You've shown me the power of hope, and how love can mend even the deepest wounds." Bella raised her head gently, her gaze steady, deep with understanding and unconditional love. In that quiet moment, Jake felt true peace settle gently within him, grateful for the journey they'd shared, for the home they'd created together. A home filled not only with warmth but also purpose and boundless love. Sometimes, the greatest lessons about love, loyalty, and sacrifice come quietly, taught not through words, but by gentle paws and trusting eyes. If Bella and little Toby touched your heart, consider joining our family here, sharing your thoughts, or simply subscribing to journey alongside us, because every story becomes richer when we experience it together.